Hello, everybody, and welcome back to AACRAO's Credential Chats. We are joined this edition by Chris Rasmussen. He is the Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs for the West Virginia Higher Education System. Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure thing, Noah. Glad to be here.
And Chris, you are involved in, in addition to local stuff, a lot of national stuff that maybe you wouldn't mind touching on. And, I know that the first time I met you was with the Colorado Department of
Yeah,
Higher Education,
yeah,
spearheading a lot of this work. And you're specifically, there in West Virginia, you've joined up with one of their projects that's part of the LER Accelerator cohort.
yeah, 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 yeah.
It's so exciting that ACRA is one of the organizations leading on. So maybe just as a starting point, you could kind of share just at a high level the perspective you're bringing from being
Sure.
involved in all these different cool activations.
Yeah, thanks, Noah. I appreciate that. So I was in the Colorado Department of Higher Education from 2018 to early 2025. Just been in West Virginia for about 9, 10 months now. But it was really, in the midst of COVID, where there was a real effort really to find ways to get people back into the workforce quickly. Part of that was how do we ensure that we can get them skills and knowledge they need to get back into the workforce, resume their careers, pick up where they left off, this kind of thing. So there's all this pressure to figure out ways in post-secondary education to deliver that. And so we saw in Colorado a lot of institutions that traditionally have not been involved in short-term programs that wanted to roll out certificates, short-term awards, partial degrees, all these things. And it raised all sorts of questions around how do we regulate this? Who's supposed to do what? How does fit into mission? Are they transferable? How do I know that two things that are called the same thing really are equivalent in content and deliverables, all these things? And so it raised all sorts of questions for us from a policy standpoint. What do we do with this, right? So we had an opportunity to join Credential as you go as part of the second phase of that work. It was us, North Carolina, and the State University of New York to do some, small grants within our institutions and to test out a more intentional development and delivery of short-term credentials, and did that for a few years, had some early successes, and then the opportunity came about to come to West Virginia, which is a whole nother story, to get involved in their ongoing micro-credentialing work is how they defined it. And so I stepped into that role in January. And for me, it's really about, as an industry, how are we delivering the knowledge and skills that individuals need to be successful in the near term and the long term in ways that don't always obligate them to a 4-year degree program or even a 2-year degree program. And along with that, Noah, one of the things I talk about in my presentations is what happens to a person who stops just short of the goal line, right? So 120 credits is a bachelor's degree. 119 is what? Not a bachelor's, right? I mean, there's no credential that comes until you earn that final credit. So I've got people thinking about, well, are we suggesting that there's no value in anything that we delivered up to that point? What is the value of that cumulative experience? And then is there a way to deliver that in shorter modules that have unique elements of value for the workplace or for your next gig, whatever that might be, or to continue on through the degree? And so that's really the principle that we're approaching the work here in West Virginia.
And it sounds like it's
Yeah.
sort of a rethinking of just value and that
Yeah.
it's not undermining the value of a degree to say that
Right.
things that
Yeah.
happen on the way to a degree have value and are worthy of formal recognition.
Absolutely. I mean, I can think of my time working in institutions and how many students did I meet that needed one credit or one class to graduate? And usually that class was statistics, right? Or calculus. A lot of business majors, they just for whatever reason couldn't get through that last requirement. You put it off, you put it off, you put it off. Well, you can't tell me they haven't mastered marketing and management and sales and finance and all the other components of a business program. So, we're thinking differently about that, and how we can both help a student progress towards a degree, but also recognize there's learning along the way that can be validated. I had a provost one time in Colorado when we were doing a statewide convening around micro-credentialing and, credentialing on the way to the bachelor's degree and being cognizant and aware of students that might leave for various reasons. Can we give them something of value? And she said, well, little concerned, Chris, because for years you've been preaching to us that we should get students across the finish line. It's all about completion of the degree. Now you're telling me we should find ways to help them drop out. And I said, well, it's not quite that way. It's really a both and because half your students are going to drop out for various reasons, right? So how do we help them get something out of that experience and also put them in a situation where they can come back and finish the degree? Yeah.
Yeah, and I also heard you talking, Chris, that you're bringing this, policy perspective, this governance perspective,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
think that really speaks to, a lot of the priorities and expertise of, a lot of ACRO members
Yeah.
that they're
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
looking at, what is the governance of this? How do we do this so that we
Yeah.
can do it in trusted ways that are
Yeah.
accurate and
Yeah.
verifiable and valid? And
Yeah.
it sounds like
Yeah.
that's actually
Right.
really at the heart of some of the work that you're leading as a part of the LER Accelerator work there in West Virginia.
Yeah. Yeah. A couple ways that I'll approach that. One is, in our work with working with institutions in West Virginia, they're really interested in doing the work. They want to go forward and innovate, but they're concerned about getting too far down the road and being told, well, that doesn't have the components that we need in order for it to count, right, as a credential that we would add to our program database. It's not going to count towards a funding formula mechanism, right? It's not something that meets the criteria that we're going to require of short-term credentials in terms of stackability, transferability, all these kinds of things. And so we have some kind of hesitancy to go forward and innovate. And a couple things came out of the Convergence conference that I found very powerful. One was, go ahead and innovate, knowing that there's a subset of these things that you do that may eventually sort of qualify to be part of something larger. But don't wait, to be told what that is. And the second was from Mike Simmons when he said, go ahead and innovate, but be sure to bring your registrar along, right? Because the registrar is important when it comes to, look, these are the rules that we have in place. These are the structural elements that, sort of guide what goes onto a transcript. And so I don't want to tell you you can't do these things, but no, in order for it to be on an official academic transcript, it has to have X, Y, and Z, right? So we've tried to sort of inculcate that lesson as well in what we do and bringing registrars along so we're not in a situation where, we have all these innovative programs and the registrars are saying, well, there's nothing we can do with these because, they just don't fit in an academic transcript. And so the time, to learn that is not after you've created dozens and dozens of programs. It's, when you're at the beginning stages of innovation. So it's funding. It's also, the sort of the integrity of our data system. So it's not just, the academic record at the institution, but, at some point, there needs to be a set of minimum sort of thresholds, if you will, or criteria that are put in place that govern, as it were, kind of what goes into our programs database. Every state needs to figure that out, and if that means that there's a separate sort of database of non-degree credentials or things that are not part of one official count, whatever that looks like. And that's what you need to do in the interim until sort of the technology and the governance structure and the will evolves to the point where we can have a simpler solution, then maybe that's what we do.
And it almost sounds like one of the
Oh,
ways that you lead in this work, Chris, is that let's try and do it as well as we can, and let's hopefully avoid the
yeah,
decisions not staying made. And
right.
let's not let a fear of that hold us back from making
Yeah,
progress that our learners need us to be marching towards.
yeah, yeah. And let us know as you're in the earlier stages of planning if there's something that you're concerned about. If there's a program that you have a question about. I just was at an event yesterday at one of our community colleges, and I had a computer science faculty person say to me, well, we want to create a micro-credential on sort of, beginning, I can't remember what it was, beginning networking, some sort of a certification where there were three courses sort of in their computer science program. But there was a sort of a co-requisite math course or a prerequisite math course that had to be done in conjunction with the first one of these computer science courses. And he said to me, well, can we include the math course in the credential? I said, well, is it required for the certificate? Yeah, well, why wouldn't you include it? But the idea was, well, I wasn't sure if we had to limit it to computer science courses. I said, no, it's about all the, technical competencies and the quantitative literacy components of quantitative literacy, mathematical and otherwise, that are required to demonstrate whatever competency you're trying to signal to an employer. So have at it, but I'm glad he asked the question, and you just never know what other kinds of questions are out there that are getting in the way of innovation. So let's talk about that. You had asked about the LER Accelerator project, and let's say something about that. We have two projects actually here in West Virginia. One is at Marshall University. My colleague Julia Spears is leading that, and that's really around finding a way to systematize the non-credit to credit, crosswalking, mapping, equivalency, generation, whatever terminology you want to use there, so that it's easier for students to get a non-credit experience and find a way for that to be added to a transcript or have a credit-bearing equivalent to it. Ours is around general education. So as we go through a couple of adjacent initiatives around Common Course numbering, rethinking with a statewide advisory group around the seamless transferability of general education credits. Let's think about the component knowledge and skills that are behind those courses and behind the general education curriculum, because we have people that are interested in doing essential skills, I guess is the nomenclature that's most common, at least here in West Virginia, micro-credentials. So figuring out a way that, we have students in our short-term associate degree and technical programs, like I want to do the welding courses, but I don't want to do the math and the English class, right? So they'll take the writing classes, I'm sorry, they'll take the welding classes and they'll drop out, right? And so it ends up being a non-completion. So, like, is there a way that we can embed sort of quantitative literacy and some writing components into the professional curriculum? Like, sure, let's talk about what that might look like. But, you need to provide some evidence to me that that's actually happening and that you're assessing that the student is mastering those competencies, not just, well, we included these as units in the curriculum you know. So that got us thinking, well, then is there a way that we can actually formally validate that? So it goes beyond the faculty member saying, well, we have this assessment in place, and so we can verify it. Like, well, let's register that in some way. Let's provide a model for others that want to do, well, let's figure out different ways in which we can deliver those skills outside of a disciplinary context. So it's not always a 3 credit class. Right, but so how do we register that? I mean, the whole question around documentation, validation, all these kinds of things. And so our LER Accelerator project is really around making room in a learner and I always mix this up, learning and employment record, because sometimes I want to say learner and employer record, learning and employment record for those essential skills, essentially demonstrating mastery of a general education curriculum that's not necessarily the completion of 30 or 35 credits. It's the demonstration of the component knowledge, skills, and abilities through a whole variety of ways. And so that's what we're doing with the guidance of Mike Simmons as our Mike Simmons, who was a good West Virginia boy, as our coach.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think that
Yeah.
it's interesting there that I hear you at the end is this that you kind of brought things together of you can have things that are based on credit hour completion. You can have things that are based off of telling the
Yeah.
story of what the credential is credentialing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And they can be mutually exclusive or not, but they don't necessarily
Right.
need to be in competition with one
Yeah.
another
Yeah.
to be able
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
give
And we're not here
trusted
to go out and
narrative.
replace the traditional general education curriculum. We want to provide space for institutions that want to go in this direction. It could be for a small subset of programs or individual students, that's sort of a in some ways, it's not new. It's a competency-based approach to the delivery of general education, but how do you do that in a more traditional setting or within the context of a more traditional educational program, whether it's a degree or certificate program?
And I love that
Yeah.
it's in a lot of ways, this is not necessarily new. It's just in a
Yeah.
lot of ways, it's
Yeah.
new thinking about how we do things. And one of the
Yeah.
other things you said at the end there was that welding example,
Yeah.
that learner who, drops out, and is like our legacy data thinking is this is an unsuccessful non-completer.
Right, right,
When in
right,
reality, they're probably not in class because they're earning a bunch of money on a job
right,
site doing
right,
what they just
right.
learned how to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. And there's a related challenge there that, the registrars are thinking about, institutional research officers are thinking about, provosts and presidents are thinking about our traditional measures of productivity and student success are all around completion. And we know there's lots of examples in the community college sector, especially where students take a few classes, they've determined that they have what they need in order to get the next job, to qualify for a promotion, to develop the skill set, to be able to launch some sort of side gig, and they leave, right? But they tell us, for reasons related to financial aid eligibility and other things, that yeah, I'm a degree-seeking student, but that's not their intent. So, the challenge we all face is how do we know when one of those dropouts is in fact a completion because they've met their goals versus a student who may actually have intended to complete the program and for whatever reason decided not to continue. So,
I
yeah.
love that, and you just bring such a pragmatism to this
Mm.
conversation, and really appreciate you sharing that kind of zoomed out
Yeah,
state and national level perspective. Folks, he's Chris Rasmussen, the Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs at the West Virginia Higher Education System. Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
absolutely. Thank you, Noah.
Thank you so much, and thank you for sharing the currency of your time and engagement with us here on Credential Chats. And until next time, have a badge for the week, everybody. So long.